Please be seated. I'm not sure if you remember, and I don't, which day it was, but there was a day within the last week or so where we had a little bit of a different weather pattern. It wasn't our normal summer afternoon thunderstorms. It was the morning where you wake up and it's just gray outside and a little bit rainy. And in my household, at least, those are the worst days. We wake up and our plans for our normal entertainment, playgrounds and beaches and all that stuff goes out the window, and we think, oh God, what are we going to do? And so we had that day, and and it got scary really, really quickly. At 9 o'clock, I talked about this wisdom. I'm becoming a parent, and that means that I'm gaining wisdom as we go along. And one of the catchphrases of wisdom that I'm learning is that toddlers and boredom should not be left alone in the same room to play. Just not a good idea. It was happening. We were getting cabin fever, like pirates stuck in the doldrums or something. It was mutiny was close. And so I asked my daughter if we might leave the house so that mommy doesn't kill us mostly. And I've trained her well to always say when Daddy says, do you want to go on an adventure? She says, yeah, because it's awesome to go on adventures with Daddy. And I've got her trained even more to be able to request the right places. So I say, do you want to go on an adventure with Daddy? And she says, yes. And I say, where do you want to go? And she says things like, to the wood store. So we go to Home Depot, where she loves to play with buckets and drill bits. Buckets might be a better idea. And I say, Madeline, where do you want to go? And she says, to the sports store. And I say, yes. And Saturday or Monday or whenever it was, I said, Madeline, where do you want to go? And she said, to the mouse store, Daddy. And I thought, oh, my child's been ruined. What happened? To the mouse store where the princesses live, Daddy. Oh, no, to the Mickey Mouse store. To the Mickey Mouse store, Daddy. But she looked at me with those eyes, and her mother has trained her as well as I've trained her to do wood store. Her mother has trained her to bat those eyes at Daddy so that she gets out of the house. And so there we were on our way to the Mickey Mouse store where the princesses live, listening to princess music in the car. And I'm pretty sure she had a princess dress on when we went. And it was shaping up to be a good morning. So we went and right when I was starting to get over I don't know, something slightly more evil than anxiety, as we were on our way there, I'm not sure if you've all have been to the Disney store over in the town center, but on the way down the sort of corridor that leads to it, there's a fountain. We were soaking wet by the time we made it to the end of the corridor, and I still managed to sort of get motivation, and I hold her hand, and we go for the door, and then I look over my shoulder, and of all things, across the corridor, there's a quiet, beautiful coffee shop. And I thought, how is it that I've not taught my daughter to say, I want to go to the coffee store, Daddy? I'm learning. So we go in, and it was remarkable. It was beautiful. And the twinkle in her eye, the excitement, the enjoyment, and she took me around the store holding my hand the whole time, and she pointed to every single character and told me who they were. And at the Disney store, they don't just have like the Cinderellas. They have Cinderella's two stepsisters and the mother of Rapunzel and all these people that I don't even know if they have names. Madeline knows what their names are. She could be making it up. I'm not sure. But she told me all of them. And there was this moment, either because I'm a party pooper or because I'm just a priest and it seemed like the right thing to do, where I thought, why doesn't she know this much about holier things, right? She can't tell me anything about the 12 disciples of Jesus or anything else. But Disney has educated her on Disney things. And as soon as I even thought those words, the wave of reality crashed on top of me. One, why it's possible for a 2.5-year-old to get that a little bit more than being a disciple of Jesus, right? Which is just sort of absurd. But it took me a minute to get that. But even more, I hope that you have cultivated this sort of reaction when you hear yourself say things like that. And that's that deal where I said, oh, I'm looking at somebody else's spirituality. That's probably because I don't want to look at my own. Maybe instead of considering my 2.5-year-old and thinking these deep philosophical things, I should say to myself, what's going on in your life right now that you would even look and project that onto her? And I did, which ruins the Disney store, by the way. But I did, and I thought about how much I want to be like a little kid with that sort of excitement about my life of faith and my relationship to the church and the opportunities we have to be a part of God's grace in this faith story. I want that twinkle in my eye about these things. I want just as much excitement to grab somebody else's hand and bring them in and say, let me tell you these stories. Let me tell you who these characters are. Let me tell you how cool this is. And to build community around that. I want to play with this stuff in the same way that a 2.5-year-old has the freedom to not just sort of passively receive the story from the storyteller, but to allow it to be his or her own story. To be creative with it, to be invited into that process. I want that. I want the adult version of that for church. I thought, I wonder if that's not at least a little piece or one other way of understanding what Jesus meant when he said, you've got to receive the kingdom like a little child. You've got to be willing to be like a little girl in a princess store. And so I've been thinking about that this week and how much I want to be like her in those moments at church. And I wonder if that's not the sort of difference that comes into our story today about bread. You might be tired of hearing Jesus talk about bread. We've been doing it for a couple weeks. We're not done yet. We'll have a little bit more to go. So we get a chance to look at it from all these different angles. And I wondered if one of the different angles isn't about how we consume the grace that is in our lives. Do we consume it actively, like a toddler in the princess store, or do we consume it passively, just taking whatever falls, like these ancestors in our story took the manna that just fell in front of them? It didn't change their lives. It didn't fill them with life. They went on to die anyway. And in fact, the whole time they were receiving it, they were grumbling about it. They weren't happy. They had forgotten the miracle that they had just experienced at the Red Sea, where God had delivered them from the hand of Pharaoh. They had tried to do a little bit more active consumption, and that's when they stepped into things like making a golden calf. And when they were delivered into the promised land, they continued to grumble and complain, and they didn't think about the miraculous thing that God had done. Instead, they started to think, hey, these other people have other religions and worship other gods. Maybe it wouldn't hurt for us to do a couple sacrifices for them. When they were active about the wrong things, and when they weren't active, they were at worst passive, if not indifferent. And it led them to death, literally and figuratively. It led them to emptiness, to disappointment, to that feeling that you get when if you've ever done this, maybe some of you are just much better people than I am, but have you done that thing where you sit down on your couch on like a Sunday afternoon and there is nothing on, but you just keep flicking through the channels until you land on something and you go, fine, whatever, I'll watch this. And then 2 hours later, you go, I just wasted 2 hours of my life, and you feel sort of empty. Y'all have done that, right? I'm not the... There are not enough heads nodding on that one. I'm starting to feel a little bit guilty. That stuff happens. It doesn't scratch that deep itch that we have. It doesn't fulfill us. It doesn't reach us where we actually want it to be reached. It doesn't entertain us. The difference between that and going out with your friends to experience something new together, to be creative with other people, to share in something you enjoy, one is just the numbing of our life, and the other one is the fulfilling of our life, is real life. I wonder if Jesus wasn't saying to these folks who were having so much difficulty understanding his conversation about bread, you can consume bread all you want to, but as long as it's the equivalent of sitting down and flicking through the channels on your TV, it's not going to give you life. But I am the bread of life. And if you actively consume this life, the life that I give for you, the grace that comes down from heaven, you will be filled. You will have that spark, that twinkle in your eye. You'll be able to take other people's hands and share with them the experience that you have seen and tasted. You'll want to participate in the process of multiplying that grace and sharing it with others. If you actively consume, it'll lead you to fulfillment. If you passively consume, it'll lead you to the same emptiness that you've seen before. I've thought about that in my own life and how much I want to actively consume that grace, that bread of life, to be filled, to have that sparkle. And I've considered that about our church as well. This church, my hunch is anyway, and I could be wrong here, but this church was built by people who are actively consuming grace in their lives. It has thrived because of the number of people who have been so excited about the grace that has fallen from heaven right in front of them, that they have taken other people by the hand and they've said, let me share this with you. That they have had that sort of glow about them. They've done things like, as I turn back to the choir, instead of sitting and saying, oh, the grace of the voices today is so beautiful, they said, I have to participate in that, and signed on. Right? And that's one of a million different stories of actively consuming the grace that is in our midst. Most of you will have those stories. Most of us have those stories at some point in our life, and we so frequently just want to get back to them. So frequently just want to have that story again. I'm equally convinced that our ratio is shifting. And I have no idea what that ratio might look like. But part of the reason I'm so convinced is because I've noticed in my life and in all of our lives that we live in a world that teaches us how to passively consume. Right? And I'm not going to do some sort of hard moralism about anything, really. But I think that's somewhat self-evident. We're in a world that entertains us without actively engaging us. We're in a world that can to reach into our pleasure centers in our brain and turn them on without ever making us leave our couch. We're in a world that's training us how to do that. And it's no surprise that that makes its way into our communities, this community and every other community. It's no surprise that that changes the way that we receive grace on Sundays, as well as every other day when grace is being just bestowed upon us so freely, bombarding us from day to day, moment to moment in our lives. We're being trained more to just sort of take it as it comes instead of taking it, feeding on it, and bringing others to the party. Being creative with the nourishment that it has brought us, using it to help nourish others. I am convinced that to the extent that I don't find that spark in my life, to the extent that I don't find that spark in our life together sometimes, it's because it's so easy for us to passively consume. We can sit in a pew or even sit with a collar around our neck for our entire lives, passively consuming church and grace, and we will never be fulfilled. We will never have that itch scratched. We'll never have that sparkle, that glow. we'll never know what it is to feast on the bread of life, where we can get out of our pews and feast, enjoy, take other people by the hand and bring them with us, proclaim the glory of what it is we experience from God on a day-to-day basis. Be transformed and return to that place where we have such enjoyment. I don't know about you, but that's what I want. And I hear from Christ today the invitation to step forward that way, to change a little bit my attitude about the grace, the everyday grace that's in our life. The grace that is as simple as bread, as simple as holding someone else's hand, as simple as meeting and greeting your neighbor. We talk a lot about the life of discipleship, and we have over the last year talked about what that means. We've come up with 6 kind of key words, and you've heard us say it dozens of times, I'm sure. We are going to build our lives of discipleship here around study and prayer and worship, around giving, around service, and around fellowship. If you think about those things, those are the same characteristics that I was talking about my daughter having in that Disney store, truly. She wants to share it with others. She wants to give thanks for the opportunity. It wasn't about buying the stuff. It was about sharing the stories with me. It was about sharing the enjoyment. It was about building community around the thing. Right? Those are the aspects of our life that draw the line between what it is to just sit in a pew, passively consuming grace, and actively pursuing grace. Those are the differences in this life of faith between going about our business as usual and finding ourselves as usual a little bit more empty than we would like to be, and being filled. And so maybe you are someone who is filled right now and you don't know how to articulate that, but maybe this is one way. And maybe, like me, more often than not, you're the type of person who's just not quite being fulfilled, for whom coming to church sometimes is like sitting on your couch. If you, like me, sometimes feel that way, perhaps the antidote is to hear the invitation today, to be actively consuming, pursuing, feasting upon the grace that is in our lives, to do so by sharing it with others, by being creative with it, by multiplying it and giving it to others. Maybe it's time for us to do that more and more. And my guess is, the more that we do that, the more that we move as a group of people toward active consumption instead of passive consumption, the more we'll be able to come together on a Sunday morning and look around the room and see in each other's eyes the same thing that I saw in my toddler's eye last week. That beautiful spark of someone who is filled with joy, being fulfilled, and actively consuming the grace of God in our midst. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.